James Paterson is the Liberal Senator from Victoria and a man who is always common sense when it comes to China. We saw yesterday that there was an apparent lockstep between our Prime Minister and New Zealand's Prime Minister. Here's part of what Jacinda Ardern and Scott Morrison had to say about the importance of Western values pushing back against an ever-expansionist China.
At no point in our discussions today did I detect any difference in our relative positions on the importance of maintaining a very strong and principled perspective on issues around trade, on issues around human rights. And you'll see that Australia and New Zealand have broadly been positioned in exactly the same place on these issues consistently.
There will be those far from here who would seek to divide us, and they will not succeed. Because as we've stood resolutely together for the values and principles that Australians and New Zealanders have stood for and indeed fought for, that will continue to be the case.
Now, James, they say lockstep. There's a little bit of wiggle words there I can see in part of what the New Zealanders are saying. But how important was it that China lashed both of our countries as a result of what was said yesterday?
Thanks, Paul. Certainly a very successful visit by the Prime Minister to New Zealand. It was really heartening and encouraging to see how much we have in common with our Kiwi brothers and sisters. In the joint statement issued by the two Prime Ministers, issues like Hong Kong and Xinjiang and the South China Sea were equally upheld. And that is a good reminder that on the substantive policy issues, on the big questions, there is no disagreement between Australia and New Zealand on this. Occasionally there might be subtle differences in tone, but actually there's no fundamental disagreement. And I think all of us have an obligation to make sure we don't exaggerate the differences when they do arise between Australia and New Zealand, because when we do that, we're actually doing the Chinese Communist Party's bidding. They would like nothing more than to divide us and to highlight divisions between us. We shouldn't play into their hands.
One of those divisions is that they're part of the Five Eyes structure, and it seemed that they weren't willing to sign up to what four of the Five Eyes were willing to say about Hong Kong. Is this just one of those incidental moments that they might be able to write off as an issue of a former foreign minister, or they were starting to show some signs of cracking that we saw China was willing to exploit?
Look, New Zealand has joined Australia in a number of joint statements of concern about Hong Kong, including the one issued literally yesterday by the two Prime Ministers. They don't join in every statement that Australia has issued. Australia equally doesn't join in every statement issued by our other friends and allies in the world, such as the US or the UK or others. And there can be subtle regional differences about when and how we choose to speak. But I don't think there can be any disagreement here. The New Zealand government is not cheering on what has happened in Hong Kong. They are as profoundly disturbed by it as we are. And it's really encouraging to see them joining with us in making that statement very clear yesterday. We should all make that statement clear because there has to be a cost to what has happened in Hong Kong. It is the Chinese Communist Party breaking its own word that it agreed to abide by, as well as being a shocking abrogation of the rights of the people of Hong Kong.
There's an easy confusion for people watching to see here, which is, on one day you see it seems that China is using very bellicose language, very over the top, people really sort of seeming like they're at the end of their tether as opposed to in the middle of their game. And then we'll turn around and hear that they've signed some multi-billion-dollar deal with a Pacific Island nation. So as a person who is a perpetual watcher of China, what do you look to that are the actual indicators of how serious, threatening, growing or unthreatening China is?
It's a great question, Paul. I think sometimes in the Australian political debate we make two mistakes. One is we overemphasise some sources of Chinese government perspective, like the Global Times. It is a propaganda outfit that is designed to generate a response in our political system, and we shouldn't overweight it and give it more respect than it actually deserves. It's deliberately provocative. On the other hand, sometimes we have a bit of a myopia. We think that the difficulties we're having in our relationship with China are not being experienced by others around the world, when the reality is almost every country with diplomatic relations with China is having a serious dispute with China, a version of Australia's dispute, some of them far worse than us. If you look at the disputed border between India and China where soldiers have been killed, or Taiwan where the PLA regularly flies into Taiwanese airspace, they are much more serious problems than we have, or very similar problems to we have. The Czech Republic is undergoing a campaign of economic coercion right now. Countries like Norway and Sweden and Finland and others have been engaging in really strong exchange exchanges of words and other conflicts with China. So we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we're having experience broadly that everyone around the world is having to some degree, and we should take some heart in that there is international solidarity there, and that collectively together we can be far more influential than China can be against us.
Good on you, James. Nice to talk to you, mate. Senator James Paterson doing the good work there in Victoria. You can find his office just by finding the Wolverine strikes there, along with plenty of others who are willing to stand up to China.